The Nintendo 64 had tons of wrestling games that I played as a kid, especially with friends. I also played a bunch of wrestling games on PlayStation 2 with my friends in high school. I remember once, my mom was going on a trip to Florida to visit a friend, and now her friend knew of a place to get cheap N64 games. Around that time, like it was before retro gaming, so Nintendo 64 games were already pretty cheap. Even the big names like Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, you could probably get for like $30 at the time. And my mom asked me, well, are there any games you want? Now I really wanted No Mercy, but I know she didn't know much about wrestling or Nintendo, and I knew it would be a lot easier if I just said to her, just ask for a wrestling game, and whichever one's black, get that one, because No Mercy had a black cartridge. So, little did I know at the time, but it turns out there were two other black cartridge wrestling games, ECW Hardcore Revolution and WWF WrestleMania 2000. About 2 years later, my grandma bought me almost every other N64 wrestling game I was missing. She said it was pretty cheap too, it was like $10 to $15 a game at the time. But I would say out of all the N64 and even the PS2 wrestling games, my favorite would have to be WrestleMania 2000. Mostly because you can pick a belt and name it whatever you want. I love being able to make belts, whether it's picking from a plethora of options or just making my own. I like being able to make a WCW or an ECW championship and a roster to accompany that. I would say from the mid-90s to the late 2000s, I was watching wrestling. Now, it wasn't always WWE, WWF either. In fact, yeah, like I remember there was a time where I only watched Ring of Honor and TNA. Plus, you know, old footage of like WCW, ECW, stuff I either wanted to rewatch or old angles and stuff that I just didn't get a chance to watch in their entirety or at all. So yeah, so like CM Punk, I still remember him as like a blonde-haired kid doing the Pepsi plunge in Ring of Honor. Guys like Samoa Joe or Kenny Omega, I still see them as Ring of Honor guys, because that's where I first saw them. Or, Kenny Omega's case, I've only seen him wrestle in Ring of Honor. Guys like AJ Styles, to me, he's a TNA guy, because that's where I saw him. Maybe he was in Ring of Honor, I don't remember everything. I think he was in Ring of Honor too, but yeah, I picture him as a TNA guy. And TNA, I think it was around 2004, I remember they made the switch to the 6-sided ring, which I thought was a really cool design for a ring. The ring really helped TNA to stand out from WWE, which was nice because that's sort of why I watched it, was because it was different than WWE. At that time, especially the mid-2000s, I wasn't actually watching a lot of WWE. I mostly would if I was hanging out with my friends who watched it, or when I was on the wrestling team. Most of the people in my high school wrestling team only watched WWE, so I did get back into it for a bit, but I thought Ring of Honor, TNA, I enjoyed that a lot more. Well, the thing about TNA is, instead of replicating WWE's success, they attempted to replicate WCW's failure when they brought in Vince Russo, Eric Bischoff, and Hulk Hogan. In fact, when they brought in Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan, I stopped watching TNA. In case you're wondering why, it's because I remember WCW. And you think the people who were partially responsible for WCW dying would have learned their lessons, but no, they just went into business for themselves and not for the TNA fans or the roster. But it wasn't all bad. Like, for the most part, it was really enjoyable. Like, I do remember guys like the Motor City Machine Guns, LAX, AJ Styles, obviously, Abyss. I thought that guy was like the coolest guy in TNA. Sting was in there too, it was really cool. But I think TNA peaked when Kurt Angle came in. When Angle came in, It felt like TNA was on track to become the second biggest promotion in wrestling, especially here in the West. But like I said, Vince Russo, Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff. That's how you ruin anything. But, Kurt Angle's run in TNA was amazing. Like, especially when he held the IWGP, TNA World Heavyweight title, the X Division title, and the TNA Tag titles, all at once. Kurt Angle was truly the Bret Hart of his generation. I was working on my WWF WrestleMania 2000 roster. I was trying to basically capture the era of wrestling that I grew up watching. So like the 90s, the 2000s, like I said. So I really wanted a roster that would reflect my experience, my memories with wrestling. So ideally, I was going to split the roster up into 4 groups. WWF, WCW, ECW, and TNA. So in case you don't know much about wrestling, there's a whole bunch of different companies, and for the most part, there's not really any crossover. I have heard of WWE letting current TNA stars show up here and there, but you're never gonna get like WWE versus AEW. Which I sort of get, like as a booker, you don't want your top guys losing to your competitors' top guys because then your company looks worse. It would be like the MCU and whatever DC movies are called, whatever continuity they're in or whatever. They would never do a crossover, and if they did, it would never be like Batman or Superman losing in a fight against Captain America or Iron Man or vice versa. But I always wanted a wrestling game where you could sort of experience that and live that out, for example. Because like it doesn't really matter at that point, like it's up to whoever's playing that's basically going to win. I would have loved something like that where you could have a full WWF versus WCW pay-per-view and have ECW guys or whatever. That would have been really cool. The closest game I can think of was SmackDown vs. Raw featuring ECW, but there was no WCW in it, there was no Attitude Era stuff, and there was very few ECW originals in it. So at one point I decided to look up ROM hacks for WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy. Basically, I wanted to try to find a hack, a ROM, a mod, anything or something that would let me edit the movesets of pre-existing wrestlers. Basically, I wanted to take out the wrestlers that I just didn't like or didn't really know much about or whatever, and put in wrestlers from either a time before, like an older time from the company, or from another wrestling company, for example. And I tried out a lot of different ones. WWF Legends, WCW Saturday Night, WCW Feel the Bang, WWF WCW Invasion. There was a whole bunch of different ones I tried. But eventually I came across Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 Freem Edition. And since then, I've been trying to build my perfect roster in the game. Now I know what you're thinking. Well, what is Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 Freem Edition? So Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 is a Japanese wrestling game. Somebody then modded the game so it would be in English, and then someone hacked that to make the Freem Edition. I don't know too much about the differences between the original and the Freem Edition. All I know is they added wrestlers and even some UFC type fighters, some MMA fighters from different promotions like WWF, WWE, WCW, ECW. They added a whole bunch of them. But basically, yeah, it's a hack of an English mod of a Japanese game. So what I did was I split the roster up into WWF/WWE, WCW, ECW, TNA, and Ring of Honor. It was actually pretty tricky to figure out the roster. Like, let me ask you something. Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, CM Punk. Where would you put those guys? See, I wanted this custom roster to encapsulate my experiences, my memories of the wrestling that I watched. So guys like CM Punk, I put him in Ring of Honor because that's where I first saw him. Same with Samoa Joe, like that's where I saw them wrestle. Guys like Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, I put them in WCW. A few things like that I did to try to round the rosters out as well, just so I had enough guys. But I did try to keep it at least as accurate to the time and my memory as possible. I can always change stuff depending on feedback I get and stuff too, but I'll show you a few of the things that I did, and hopefully it makes more sense to you once I show you. Page 1, I tried to put the guys that I remember from the 90s and the Attitude Era. Page 2, same thing, got the Hardys, Edge and Christian, got the New Age Outlaws. Page 3 is a bit of the older guys, some guys from the 90s, you know, even like Ron Simmons and stuff. Some of the other guys, like the Warriors, Mr. Perfect, Iron Sheik, Ultimate Warrior, stuff like that. WWE, tried to put the guys that I remember that I liked. Also tried to put in guys like Cody Rhodes, Roman Reigns, some of the newer guys. WCW, again you got the NWO at the top here. Got some of the other guys, Ric Flair actually. Got Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, Tully. You got the Four Horsemen right there, all in one. Page 3, I tried to put in the, you know, the cruiserweight division that WCW had. It was like amazing. Rey Mysterio, I even kept the Rey Mysterio without the mask. I put him in there, I mean. I actually put Dominic Mysterio as his alternate. I know his son never wrestled for WCW, but made sense to put him with Rey. Just like I put Chavo with Eddie. I even included some other stuff like Chris Benoit's Pegasus Kid persona, Eddie Guerrero's Black Tiger. If I go back to WWF, you can see Stone Cold. There's a Ringmaster, Superstar Steve Austin, ECW days. You got Stunning Steve Austin. You have Mean Mark Callis, Shawn Michaels, even put Marty Jannetty. So I have put the Rockers in there. You got Triple H, DX. You got like the new short hair Triple H. You got his WCW persona, Rocky Maivia. Even Big Show. You got Captain Insano from the Waterboy. You got the Giant, NWO. Even some of the WCW guys. You got Scott Hall and Razor Ramon. Kevin Nash. You got Diesel. You got Hulk Hogan. You got his Mr. America persona. You got Hulk Hogan himself, the old classic one. WCW 4, just some other guys who wrestled. Dustin Rhodes, I even put in Gold Dust. Got like Rick Rude, Michael Hayes, Lex Luger, Big Vito, Lance Storm, Fit Finlay, Mang, Chris Kanyon, even put Mortis in there. Tried to capture a lot of the other guys, like other personas and stuff. Got Dusty Rhodes even. ECW, you know, a bunch of the classic guys, even got Rhino. Bunch of the guys I remember. Bubba Ray, you got Bubba, is ECW, WWF, Brother Ray when he was in TNA. You even have Bully Ray. Cactus Jack, you got the Four Faces of Foley, Dude Love, Mankind, Mick Foley. Devon, WWF. Brother Devon from TNA, just normal Devon, TNA. Some more ECW guys. TNA, I tried to put in LAX, Team Canada, the Motor City Machine Guns. Of course, you got Angle, Jarrett, Abyss. Ring of Honor, put in CM Punk, Samoa Joe, and Austin Aries. Put Low Key in there. Even Kenny Omega, I remember him in Ring of Honor. So I've added about 115 wrestlers so far. And I know not all of them look exact or whatever. I am limited by, obviously, the create a wrestler options. It's not like I can just put anything in or whatever, so I am limited by that. But I did take out about 50 or so wrestlers. Like I said, I added 115. Try to make them as accurate as possible. I am making a lot of guys, so as time goes on, I can always go back and fix things or whatever, but my goal is to put in about 200 wrestlers. I want every wrestler to have an alternate. Like you saw some guys would, if I just went to a different costume of theirs, it would be a different wrestler. A lot of, I put in about 66 what I would call variations. So Stone Cold, I would count that as a wrestler, obviously. But his different persona that he wrestled under, like the Ringmaster or Stunning Steve Austin, I would count those as variations. So I'm trying to get a roster that reflects my experience and my memories and the time frame of era, or the time frame of wrestling that I watched. So that's why you'll see guys in some companies that you may not have even known that they wrestled for. Like a lot of people I know don't know that Kenny Omega, CM Punk, Samoa Joe, Bryan Danielson, they all wrestled for Ring of Honor. I know a lot of those guys have either gone on to AEW or whatever, WWF, WWE, I still call it F sometimes. TNA, I know they went on to a bunch of other companies and stuff too, but, I'm more worried about the accuracy to my memories in the 90s and 2000s than I am modern day stuff. But in some of the variations, like you saw, I did include some other persona, like Booker T, for example. I included his variations of G.I. Bro and King Booker from WWF. I do have this Word document where I did track all the wrestlers I added, as well as what finishers I'll be using for them. I still need to add the name of the finishers too. I even included the variations, and a list of wrestlers that I still want to add. I also have another one to let me know which wrestlers I changed to who, what movesets of theirs I might have copied, as well as what finishers I gave them. While I'm not done, my ultimate goal is to try to make a roster that best encapsulates my experience with wrestling. Like, a lot of the guys who came up, I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, probably won't be in the roster. Like, even the WWE guys, you're not going to see, like, Seth Rollins or LA Knight, for example. But instead, I put in guys like MVP, Johnny Nitro, like the guys that I remember. So it is getting there. But I did also try to include, I mostly put in, but I did try to keep wrestlers that I just either don't like or didn't plan on playing as or whatever, just for the feeling of roster authenticity. For example, John Cena. I'm not really a big fan of him in terms of wrestling, but you can't really have a WWE roster without John Cena or Brock Lesnar. So I know it's not perfect. For example, appearances, especially the faces, they're not going to be 100%. I can always tweak them, work on them as I go, but for some guys, it's not going to be 100% accurate. Movesets, not every finisher is in the game. For example, Petey Williams and his Canadian Destroyer, the best I can do is a jumping pile driver. I know it's not really the same. I mean, technically the Canadian Destroyer is a jumping pile driver, but yeah, I do have to make some compromises here and there. But it's not too bad. It doesn't affect stuff too much for me, at least. Like, I'm just trying to basically build the perfect roster. Perfect for me, at least. And with Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 Freem Edition, I have as close to a perfect wrestling game as possible. This is the closest I've ever come to my ideal wrestling game. The one thing that sort of stopped me from doing this in a lot of wrestling games before is the fact that you couldn't edit a wrestler's movesets. In the PS2 games you could, but you couldn't edit their appearance like you could here. So ideally, I'd like to be able to edit the appearance and the movesets, but like you see for pre-existing wrestlers, you're not able to change any of them. What makes this game perfect for me though is there's a GameShark code that lets me edit pre-existing wrestlers' movesets. So basically, I can change a wrestler's appearance and their movesets and finisher around so that way they're a new wrestler. So I can take somebody out and put in somebody else, which is basically what I want. The only issue is, if the game resets or I have a match, the moveset changes that I made go back to normal. Luckily, like you saw, I do have a document so I can always change stuff back, but I do plan on using a save state. So what'll happen is, I load up the game, I press a button, it loads the save state where all the changes are done. So after a match, I can just reload back to a previous state where the movesets, they're all done. So luckily there is a workaround. It is a bit janky, but there is a workaround. And right before I started filming, I did find out that I can actually add the memory card characters to the roster. This is really janky. Like, I have to do all the edits before I enable the code and all that, and I can't just move these guys around to other parts of the roster and mix them around and stuff. So it's not ideal, it is janky, but at least there's a workaround. Using the memory card GameShark code, I am hoping to add in a page for the newer WWE guys, as well as add a new roster for the AEW guys. It's been a lot of fun. I still have about 50 wrestlers I'm looking to add. I am hoping to get the roster ultimately up to about 200 wrestlers. I would really like for most wrestlers to have an alternate, meaning if you go to a wrestler and you go to costume 4, that it's another wrestler. Some guys I might not be able to do that for, but like you saw with Ric Flair, I was able to get 4 wrestlers in one. So I would like it to average out to the point where everybody has an alternate, but you know, that's a lot easier said than done. But I think going forward, Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 Freem Edition will probably be my go-to wrestling game. It's not perfect, a lot of the GameShark codes and stuff, it's a bit janky and all this, but it's as close to a perfect wrestling game that I'm going to get. Recently, I did just get Fire Pro Wrestling World. I've only had one match, but I do like what I see so far. My favorite thing is you can search up wrestlers that already exist and that people made and just download them, saving you time and filling out rosters. I will say the Creative Belt is what I dislike most about the game. You only have these options and that's it really. Like, I can download an ECW logo for this ring, but I can't download custom belts. So I am excited to play some more of Fire Pro. Basically, I want to do what I'm doing with Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, where I just make that ideal roster that I want. So that'll be cool, especially if I can learn how to mod it, so I can add in some of those custom belts and stuff that I wanted, or at least some of the more recognizable belts, like the WCW, the big gold belt. That would be amazing. And yeah, when I was in high school, my friends and I sort of had like a wrestling promotion. It wasn't anything crazy, and like it wasn't like backyard wrestling where we set each other on fire and roll around in barbed wire and break each other's head open with chairs and stuff. It was mostly like amateur wrestling with some like professional wrestling moves thrown in, like suplexes and stuff like that. We never got hurt or anything, but it would just be fun in a video game to just, you know, have the fantasy, the roster that I want, and you know, the perfect roster, blah blah blah. But it would also be nice to just add in the high school friends, the little promotion that we had, and put myself in one of these games too. So we'll see how it goes with Fire Pro Wrestling. Another reason I picked Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 is because there's what's called a maximum finisher. I'm not going to get too much into it, but basically each wrestler has 2 finishers. So before, I would have to find a wrestler that shares a finisher with a pre-existing wrestler in the game, and then just put like both of them in like one character slot. But now that I can add two finishers, I could basically have two wrestlers with different finishers in one slot. So it makes it a whole lot easier. I'm just thinking, basically, like, my ideal perfect wrestling game would be one that's like the No Mercy engine, the Aki engine, I believe it's called, the same one that Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 uses and the WCW games used and stuff. Like, I would just love basically that, whether it's a big studio, small studio, indie, whatever, even if it's like a one-man crew. I just want that with as much customization as possible, from the pre-existing wrestler to the belts, the arenas, blah blah blah. As much customization as possible, something with mod support, that would be really cool. Will I ever get a game like that? Probably not. Like, when I was a kid, I really wanted the Stone Cold Smoking Skull Championship belt. But I mean, I did get it as an adult, so maybe one day I'll find my perfect wrestling game. Until then, Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 Freem Edition is as close as I'm going to get. So like, comment, and subscribe to everybody's favorite YouTuber, Yo, it's L.